Last on Everdark. Balthazar and Christian find that the Order is squeezing all of the vampire houses for the best potential fledglings, acolytes, and more. Caemorn, and maybe his master, Artemis Elusius, have a plan to take the best and brightest for themselves, overthrow the Vampire Council, and maybe seize the throne. Daemon returning has put a bit of a crimp in those plans. Now we return to Daemon and Julian. Everdark, Episode 33, Leaving Home. "Are you speaking with Balthazar?" Daemon asked. The Vampire King tilted his head to the side and regarded the cell phone that Julian was speaking into with that cat-like interest. Remembering how cute Daemon had been with his own cell phone, Julian was a little nervous about what Daemon would do with an operating one.
Yeah. Why?"
Julian pulled the cell phone a little bit away from his ear, but he kept a firm hold on it. "I need to speak to him regarding some garbage pickup," Daemon responded, putting emphasis on garbage, and Julian suddenly understood what he meant. The two confessors he had taken out were still unconscious in a heap by the side of Wingate. They couldn't leave them there. They should interrogate them or something, and then keep them prisoner, let them go. Definitely not kill them. Though they had wanted to kill Liz and Henry, he hoped that Balthazar would have an idea of what to do with them. So he handed the phone over to Daemon, and was surprised at how deftly the Vampire King handled the phone this time. "Balthazar, it's Daemon. I need to discuss a private matter with you." Daemon then looked up at the thorns and said, "Would you please excuse me for a moment?"
"Of course,"
Liz said, though her eyes were alight with curiosity and a little distrust of the Vampire King. Henry just nodded, and Daemon glided out of the kitchen and beyond the thorns' hearing range. Julian's keen hearing allowed him to still track the discussion. Daemon told Balthazar about the two confessors and the need for a clean-up team to come to Wingate and take them into custody so they could be questioned. Balthazar's tone darkened as he heard about the thorns being targeted. "Of course they would be. I should have thought of that. We can't leave them unattended. I will send some of my people to watch over them," Balthazar responded, but there was dissatisfaction in his tone. "The ideal thing would be to bring them to the house, but that has its own issues."
Like Christian telling his parents that, surprise, vampires are real, and surprise, he and I are both vampires. Will the Thorns ever forgive me for getting Christian involved in all this?
Julian wondered. He glanced up at Liz then. She was studying his face while rolling the wine glass between her hands. He could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was wondering about Daemon. She was wondering about Balthazar. She was also likely wondering what had brought these new men into her boys' lives, and if this was a good thing or a bad thing. What she didn't know was how very complicated it was.
"Julian?"
Liz began tentatively. She cast her voice low, thinking that there was no chance of Daemon hearing her. But, of course, the Vampire King's sensitive ears would pick her voice up easily, and he could listen through Julian's too.
"Daemon is very interesting."
Interesting was a code word for likely dangerous, and I'm not sure I want him near you. Julian felt a welling of warmth for her and Henry. They cared about him just like his parents had. It made it that much harder to lie to them, but he had to.
"I know you'll like him when you get to know him,"
he assured them both. He wondered if that was true. Would what Daemon was always overshadow who he was to them?
"It's just so sudden. We've never heard about this man before, and now he's here, in your house and in your life. A lot in your life from the way you are together,"
Liz pointed out.
"It's complicated. We met unexpectedly, and sort of from the moment that we met, it felt like we were going to be together forever,"
he said, grinning too brightly, as he knew these over-the-top statements would likely only confirm Liz's fears, because she didn't know how true they were.
"What does he do exactly?"
Liz pressed.
"He doesn't have a job per se. I mean, he runs things,"
Julian explained, wishing Daemon would get back already so that they couldn't talk about him anymore.
"He has a lot of money, I can tell from his clothes and the way he holds himself,"
Henry said.
"which is good and bad."
"And what does that have to do with anything?"
Julian couldn't help the defensiveness that crept into his voice.
2 things. 1, he isn't after your fortune. I've worried about this in the past. You don't flaunt the wealth you have, but there are plenty of predators out there who would be pleased to be with someone who could take care of them instead of them taking care of you.
Henry pointed out, ever practical. There had been a couple of guys who had wanted him to be their sugar daddy. He had no problem sharing his wealth, so if Daemon had been poor, he wouldn't have cared. But these guys didn't have any ambition. They simply wanted to live the life of a pampered pet. Julian had no time for people like that.
Well, I can assure you that Daemon does not need or want my money.
Julian crossed his arms over his chest.
He's got more than enough of his own. Believe me that his fortune dwarfs mine.
That's good, I'm glad to hear it. But there is the other side of the coin, with a man who has that kind of money and not a lot to occupy himself.
Which is?
Julian made a gesture for him to say more.
He might turn his mind to problems that, well, don't exist.
Henry said gently.
Couldn't the same be said of me?
Julian's back was ramrod straight.
My parents' estate is substantial, and
It's not the same thing at all, honey.
Liz objected quickly.
You are following in your parents' footsteps. Daemon is...
Daemon is...
Julian repeated internally.
They have no idea how to finish that sentence, and so they're filling the void with fears from me. They could never guess the truth, and I can't just lay it out for them.
She looked over at Henry, and they exchanged a look that only people who knew one another for a very long time and very intimately could do. There was quite a bit of information exchanged in a single glance. Julian immediately held up his hands as if blocking a physical blow from them. Their disapproval would be a blow to him. He knew, if they actually understood who and what Daemon was, that they would likely have even more fears than these, but still, it hurt having them believe something that wasn't true.
I need the two of you to hold off judgment about Daemon and anything you've learned tonight for a while,
he said.
You don't have all the information.
What additional information is there for us to have?
Henry's erudite brow furrowed.
A lot. So much that...
Julian let out a slightly hysterical laugh.
That I can't even quantify for you.
Both Liz and Henry looked perplexed and more worried than before, but there was little he could do about that. Christian would have to be the one to make the final decision as to whether his parents knew the truth about them and vampires or not. Julian didn't see how their relationship would continue without the truth, not to mention the danger that beset them from all sides, which was likely to break it all out into the open anyways. But Christian really needed to be the moving party in this, as the Thorns were his blood parents.
I just ask that you please be patient and trust Christian and me,
he told them.
This is bigger than simply having new boyfriends.
He knew that this would alarm them further, but it would stop the flood of questions that both of these very intelligent, empathetic people would want to ask. For the moment, anyway. At that moment, Daemon reappeared in the kitchen. He handed Julian the cell phone as if he routinely handled them all the time. There was none of that cat-like curiosity and quick movements that had characterized his earlier experiences with it. Daemon was a born actor.
Everything okay?
Julian asked. Yes, was all that Daemon said out loud. But over their bond he explained more fully. Balthazar will send people both to take care of the two confessors and look after the Thorns. We can be at ease and go to Absinthe to meet these people Balthazar wants to introduce us to.
What people does he want us to meet?
Julian knew he sounded pettish at having to share Daemon with these unknown individuals. This was likely just the first time that they would have to be with others instead of alone, because of who Daemon was. Daemon reached over and squeezed his shoulder. We can tell Balthazar no and have the evening to ourselves, Daemon offered. Julian's heart thawed a little at those words.
No, Balthazar wouldn't ask it if it wasn't important.
He believes that we may gain some allies in House Margolis of the Mirror bloodline if these people meet us, Daemon explained.
Then we absolutely have to meet them. We need as many allies as we can get.
Daemon looked rather perplexed for a moment. I can handle Caemorn and the Order on my own once I am at full strength, or even close to that. Julian didn't believe him. How could one vampire fight a whole religion? Was Daemon overestimating his powers or underestimating the strength of the vampires they'd be facing?
That might be so, but you don't want to be the vampire's enemy, right? You want them to turn to you, don't you?
Julian pointed out. I suppose, but not at the expense of your unhappiness. This meeting can happen another time. Daemon stroked his arm, which had Julian's heart thumping like crazy in his chest.
No, I'm good with it. I'm fine, really.
Julian half lied.
Thank you for thinking of me first, though.
I told you, Julian. You are the one I am here for, Daemon said. Julian's cheeks flushed with pleasure. Liz and Henry were watching them closely. It must have looked so strange to outsiders. They weren't speaking out loud, but they were clearly having a conversation.
Oh, is, something wrong?
Liz asked. Shaking himself, Julian answered.
No, not at all. I'm sorry, I'm just distracted because we really have to join our friends, but I don't want to leave you.
That's all right, Julian.
Henry interrupted him smoothly as he put a hand around his wife's waist.
Liz and I didn't intend to disrupt your evening. We were just worried about you when...
I was the one that was worried, clearly unnecessarily, though please do check your cell phones once in a while. But Henry's right, we don't want to get in your way.
She swallowed the remainder of her wine and then hugged Julian.
You will let me know if tomorrow is a good day for dinner, won't you?
Julian couldn't think of a worse time for this dinner in some ways. After all, the Order was likely to start moving against them tomorrow. But if not tomorrow, then when? Unless, or until the threat of Caemorn and the Order were neutralized, things would never be good. In Julian's mind, it was better for the Thorns to learn sooner rather than later what he and Christian were involved in.
Everdark started as a written story published on the website wraithrain.com. And that's what Wraithrain is mostly about, my writing. Like Everdark, all my stories are gay, romantic action and adventure set in imaginary worlds or alternate versions of our world that include shifters, elves, vampires, and magic. I write these stories serially, which means one chapter at a time, like fan fiction or web novels, and publish each chapter as soon as it's done. I always have 3 or 4 stories I'm updating at the same time. One of these currently is Everdark Academy, which is the sequel to Everdark. What happens to a serial story when it's done? It's left on the site, along with all the member comments. I've been doing this since 2010, so I have a ton of completed gay romantic stories to binge read. One of these completed stories, of course, is Everdark, so if you absolutely can't wait to find out about what happens, you can read all 147 chapters of it. And then go on to Everdark Academy.
If you wanted to come to Absinthe...
Julian left that open. The Thorns would find out even sooner if they accompanied the two of them to this meeting. But Henry was taking Liz's arm in his, and the two of them were already heading towards the front door.
No, Julian. You and Daemon have a wonderful time tonight.
But you will call me tomorrow, won't you?
Liz cried over her shoulder.
About when we're getting together.
I promise.
He called, even as he wondered about the logistics of this. They slept during the day. They'd have to make a plan tonight at Absinthe regarding what to do about the Thorns, and then leave a message for them. It sounded like it would be a mess.
What's new about that? Nothing has exactly been normal since we found Nightvallen.
Julian thought.
God, that feels like years ago.
When the solid thunk of the front door closing reached his ears, Julian grabbed the bottle of wine and downed what remained in the bottle. The red wine burned his throat, but he only felt a mild buzz after he drank it. Daemon took the bottle from him. Human stimulants and depressants will not affect you as they once did. Your new vampire form will process all such toxins very effectively, he explained.
Oh, damn.
Julian felt like he could really use the full effect of a drink at that moment. A drink, or 10, really. You need true sustenance in any case. I need to feed you, Daemon said. Julian nodded. He thought of the feeding last night. It had been so goddamn hot. But then the morning had freaked him out with blood smeared over his lips and chin. human blood. Yet that was what he needed, and he was craving it actually at this moment. Thankfully, he hadn't felt any hunger towards the thorns.
Let me just pack a few things, and then we can take off,
Julian said. Daemon followed after him as he took the stairs 2 at a time to the 2nd floor. He was intent on getting his and Christian's computers and cameras as well as some clothes for both of them. It was strange, and yet surprisingly natural, to walk through Wingate with Daemon by his side. This place feels like you. Very comfortable. Warm, Daemon remarked as he glanced around Julian's bedroom.
Thanks. I wish we could stay a little longer so you could really enjoy it.
Julian felt a slight dissatisfaction as he realized he wouldn't be able to show just how comfortable and warm his bed could be, but they had things to do. There would be time to have Daemon make part of this space his own. You mustn't feel sad about leaving, Julian. We will be back here in happier times, Daemon assured him.
Yeah, I know. I guess there are a lot of things about how we met and how things are now that I wish were different,
Julian admitted. He'd packed for trips thousands of times, so he felt no loss at leaving Wingate this time. But there was still that thought that it wasn't his choice to leave. He and Christian would return. Daemon and Balthazar would also be part of that package. Wingate was home, and always would be. He yanked out one of his backpacks. He could stuff it with countless clothes and all his gear. Daemon took it for him and held it as Julian began to expertly fill it with clothes rolled up into their smallest packages. He placed delicate electronics between the layers of soft clothing. They needed to produce another episode of their web series. People would begin to get concerned, as Liz Thorne had if they didn't post something soon.
and I want to keep doing it.
He realized Julian's lust for adventure hadn't dimmed one iota since becoming a vampire. But now that he knew there was so much more out there than he even had guessed at in his wildest dreams, he doubted he would be satisfied simply going to ancient ruins that held nothing but overgrown stones and weathered imagery or writing. His search for vampires had been a large part of the show. They had to determine what to do about that as well. "You are very intent," Daemon remarked as Julian thrust the final hoodie into the backpack and drew the drawstrings tight.
I'm thinking about Christian and my show,
He admitted.
I'm trying to figure out what it'll be from now on and how we'll handle the vampire thing.
"Continuing this form of entertainment is clearly important to you," Daemon said carefully, although his words were anything but careful.
Entertainment?
Julian's back went up, but he forced himself to stop his offense. He was so used to people not taking his and Christian's show seriously because of its content that Daemon's innocent comment was annoying him. He explained calmly.
This show is very important to Christian and me. When I was the only one that knew my parents' deaths weren't an accident, the show let me demonstrate to the world that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. If there were really ancient cults and powerful cabals and vampires, then maybe what I was saying happened to my parents was possible.
But you know what happened to your parents now. There is no doubt in your mind. Why continue with this show? You have many other responsibilities. Daemon handed the filled backpack back to Julian when Julian indicated that he would carry it instead of the Vampire King.
Because I remember what it was to be human and have little hope.
Julian marshaled his thoughts as best he could.
Humanity is at its best when it knows there's hope, a new frontier, something more than what we can see, hear, feel, touch. Our show gave hope to those that there was something more out there than the mundane. I can't just stop it when I actually know there is more.
Daemon stroked his chin. "Let us put your idea to the test. Do humans really want to know there is more out there? Does it give them hope to know there is?"
I think so. But how are we going to test that?
Julian shrugged the backpack on. "I need to feed you and myself, so we must go to an area where there are many healthy people, and there we will perform an experiment," Daemon said.
What kind of experiment?
Julian's eyes narrowed.
We're not supposed to let humans know we exist, right?
House Ravenscroft needs more acolytes. If humanity really is, at its core, in need of inspiration, it shall become readily apparent, Daemon said.
I didn't say all of humanity.
Julian waved his hands in the air.
I just meant the people who watch the show. And not all of them, just some of them.
Daemon nodded as if this narrowing of the pool was no big deal. "We shall find some of your audience. They might very well be the best people to replenish and add to House Ravenscroft's acolytes. If you're right, that is.
Okay, but I don't know who the audience is, and
I can find them. Don't worry about that. Daemon grinned at him. Julian nodded after a minute. He wasn't going to argue that the small number of people in town who were fans and had this need meant it was likely that the experiment was not going to be conclusive. But then again, maybe there would be a soul or two out there that would fit the ticket. With that in mind, he hiked the backpack up on his shoulder and followed Daemon out of Wingate. Daemon took the lead, though he had never been in the city before. Yet he unerringly threaded their way through street after street, down a few alleys, and finally they came out in the equivalent of the entertainment district. Front Street was populated by bars and the hottest restaurants. One couldn't walk a foot without running into the next big thing. Daemon stripped the backpack off Julian and threw it up onto the top of one of the buildings.
hey, what are you doing?
Julian cried. It will be safe up there, because only you or I can get to it when we're done here. I do not think seducing people will be comfortable if you are carrying such a container, Daemon explained. Julian had to agree with him. Daemon put a hand on his shoulder, while with the other he pointed into one of the hottest bars on Front Street. It was a bar called Dobby. Julian could see it was packed with absolutely no seats and no room at the bar except for a sliver here and there. In that establishment, we will look for acolytes for House Ravenscroft, as well as food for us tonight, Daemon explained. Julian was already shaking his head halfway through that directive. Dobby was packed. It would be impossible to get in, let alone talk to anyone over the din. He tried to explain that to Daemon, but the Vampire King just laughed and shook his head. Julian, you are a vampire now. These things are no longer even issues for you, let alone insurmountable ones. Daemon pushed him gently towards Dobby's front doors. When you have someone you think is worthy, let me know.
You're coming in too?
Julian felt a wave of relief go through him, but it didn't last long as Daemon shook his head. I will be going in and getting prey. We'll be working together, as we did when you fought the Confessors. I shall give guidance, but you will do the work yourself, Daemon explained.
This is a teachable moment, isn't it?
Julian sighed. Daemon didn't seem deflated at all by his response, but instead just nodded. Of course, learning by doing is the best method. Julian looked over at the front of the packed bar. He had never lacked confidence in picking someone up before. Now it should be no different, except for the fact that he had no interest in anyone other than Daemon. Yet this wasn't about getting someone for himself. This was for Ravenscroft. This was for food. He wasn't sure how he felt about reducing a person, a fan especially, into a meal. Not that Daemon had ever acted like the acolytes were anything but precious, yet still. But he nodded and started towards the bar. He'd only gotten 2 feet when Daemon's hands were on his shoulders, and the Vampire King was pulling him around so that they were face to face again. In order to comply with YouTube community guidelines, the next section of the podcast has been abridged. Daemon's next words confirmed that. You are not to go in there looking for a love partner.
No. And you aren't either.
Julian added as an afterthought. Daemon flashed fangs. Not in the least. I am hungry in quite another way.
Good.
Daemon drew a finger beneath Julian's jaw. I will be there for you, so do not worry. Spread your wings. Find the predator in sight. Use it to guide you. Julian nodded, still stunned by that kiss, and turned back towards Dobby. He'd been a badass vampire tonight. Now he had to try the softer touch. He could do this. With Daemon's help, he could do anything. Join us next time for episode 34, Revenge.
There's another part of the membership content on wraithrain.com that I haven't talked about in a long while, I think, and that is the manga. I love manga, and I post several pages each month according to the schedule. Working with these talented artists is so much fun. They get to produce their best work without a grueling schedule, and sometimes you'll get manga that is too hot for Amazon, such as The Werewolf Next Door, which is straight up sexy times for over 100 pages. With werewolves, If manga or reading isn't your thing, but you still would like to join to support the podcast, thank you so much. Getting to run Wraith Rain is my dream job. And even though we're not even through volume 2 of the podcast on the public podcast, but we are going to be on the private one, just so you know, we're committed to all 147 chapters of it being produced at the high quality you've experienced so far. So until next week, I can't wait to speak with you again. Take care, guys. Bye.
The Everdark podcast by X Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.